go about?
Yes, I think that's a great question. And I did start recording because I promised some people I would do that, Isabel, and then I forgot. I think that's a great question. And honestly, one that came up when I went out to do an observation of Caitlin this fall, writing an IFSP, because mom's goal was for the child to talk, and the child probably is going to end up with a diagnosis of autism and is many steps away from talking as the mom wanted her to. And Caitlin was trying to steer mom towards, I'm going to say, a more realistic goal developmentally, using gestures, using signs, and mom was really focused on the words. And so Caitlin and I had a chance to talk after, and really talked about how the buy-in for the program is supposed to be family-centered outcomes, right? We're not supposed to try and talk a mom in or out of anything that their priorities are. I do think it's our job to educate on what those smaller baby steps look like along the way before we, get to the goal of walking or talking. But I do think it's really important to honor what the parents want, because that's their vision of their child, right? And developmentally, we know sometimes that's very far away, but also I think, crushing dreams is a really difficult thing to do when a baby is a baby. So Caitlin and I had talked about, and I think I shared this analogy with the leadership team. Years ago, I went on a mission trip to Haiti, and it was about 2 or 3 years after that really bad earthquake. And I expected it in my mind to be a country that had been rebuilt like it would have been probably over here, and it was not. And there were, I'm not joking, piles and piles of garbage, and cows standing on garbage, and naked children running. Like it blew me away. And on the mission trip, there were all of us on the bus, and we're asking questions to our mission leader, and she kindly said, I am going to tell you everything I can in our week here, and I'm going to answer all of your questions, but I'm going to do it slowly, because if I tell you everything now, you're not going to be able to absorb it. And so I think about that with development. Like, if we give parents everything, right, they're going to shut down. It's too much for them at once. And so thinking about, again, those tiny baby steps to meet that larger objective or goal that might be longer down the path than the parents realize. So that's my analogy on why it's important, I think, to honor the family's goals and priorities, but also why it's really important to baby step those developmental milestones. Taylor, you've been writing IFSP objectives out of everybody in the group for the longest. How does that, go along with your experience, and what's another, perspective or another layer you could add for honor?
Yeah, so I would say that comes up a lot. Obviously, since I'm speech, they always just want the end goal. And I'm usually always very honest with my families, and I've never really had anyone, be mad at me for telling them we might need to go through multiple steps before we get to that point. I always start, before we start writing outcomes with the family, I always say, we're going to do this together, but I want them to be important to you, because I want us to be able to work on them when I come over. So if the evaluation team gave you the idea of their delays and it's not something you want to focus on, that's totally fine. And then if a parent does tell me oh, I just want my child to have 50 words and they're only babbling a few consonants, I usually say that is a great end goal for us to have, and we can write that as a goal. But when we go to do our services, we're going to be focusing on all of these other steps before we can get there. And then I usually tell them we can keep that as a goal, or we can write a few smaller goals. And then when we re-evaluate and look at the goals in 4 to 6 months, we can make that our new end goal. And so sometimes parents still just say, yep, I want 50 words. I want them to talk in sentences. And then I say, great, we will work to that. But a lot of the times they'll say, okay, so like what other things would they need to do? So then we can kind of maybe add a few other ones. So that's usually how I approach it in terms of like communication stuff. I'll also give my parents the analogy of like, I always call it my language ladder. And I always tell them, just picture that there's a ladder on the side of your house. If you're trying to climb it, you can't get from the bottom rung to the fifth rung without probably falling. So I tell them like, we kind of have to hit all of these other rungs on our ladder before we're going to get to that final step. And so sometimes giving them that visual really helps them put it into perspective because they don't want their child to fall. They want them to hit them all. So then that kind of helps. And I feel like you could probably use that in a lot of different disciplines, just letting them know that it will be a buildup. But kind of like Monica said, I mean, at the end of the day, they're going to decide if they want it or not. So I always will write it. If that's the important part for them, I always put it in there. But I do always tell them up front that at our first visit, we won't be working on them talking in sentences. So I don't know, I guess that's my 2 cents on it. But I also feel like early intervention is nice because there's a lot more flexibility in terms of your goal writing. Like it doesn't have to be 3 out of 5 opportunities for, like, it doesn't have to be so detailed and specific. They can be a little broader, which I feel like too makes it a little bit easier to kind of bend or give ranges to maybe help show the family that, oh, if we hit this lower range, that's still great, but we can also put your really high range on there. So yeah.
So that's one of the questions I had was all the years I've written goals, they've all had to be measurable.
Yeah.
So do we have to make sure we have anything specific for like Medicaid reimbursement in our goals?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the shortest answer is no. That's the lovely thing about so Medicaid has different pots, and the pot that you're probably used to dealing with is the private insurance pot of Medicaid. Medicaid's pot for us is referred to as early childhood intervention, and they don't require that specificity because it's 2 entirely different pots of money. So although we don't have to make it measurable, right, in the sense of a criteria or a percentage, we definitely want there to be some type of measurement. And that typically comes instead in how the goal is written. Typically, a goal should have 4 parts to it. It should have a timeline that's meaningful for the family, not meaningful for us. It should have a learner, typically the child, the mom, the nanny, whatever. So you've got your timeline, you've got your learner, then you also have your activity setting. So that was something we talked about, the RBI. So meal time, right? Snack time, bath time. And then you have whatever the skill or that participation is going to be. So, by the summer, John, will, walk to Target holding his mom's hand so she doesn't have to carry him. Lot different than by the summer, John will walk. So it's that whole, and the family will always give you the skill first, right? I want my child to talk. I want my child to walk. And some of the therapists will kind of use like scripted statements. What speech, open-ended kind of, fill in the blank types of things, closed procedures. So, if a family says to you, I want my child to walk, you can say, okay, you want your child to walk so that he can, and then just have mom and dad fill in the blank so that he can, greet me at the garage when I come in from work, or so that I don't have to carry him everywhere because the new baby's being born. So if you give the family an opportunity to fill in the blank, they'll fill it in with something that's meaningful to them. And then you can say, when would you like him to walk? Most families are going to say yesterday. But again, usually within that fill in the blank, you're going to get your timeline too. By the time the second baby comes, when grandma and grandpa come to visit this summer. So it's a really cool way, I think, to get that participation and get that routine without doing it in an awkward Robin McWilliams type of way, right? Which, isn't a very natural way to talk. Taylor, have you had any experience with, again, that may work, also in terms of getting that family to give you that meaningful timeline and that meaningful activity participation for you when you're writing goals?
Yeah, I mean, I always start like by asking them, like, what do you want your child to do? And then they'll say, like, oh, I want them to be able to tell me what they want to eat. And so then we'll talk about like, this is what they're doing now. And then what would that what would that look like? Like, what do you want them to be able to communicate to you? How do you want them to be able to communicate to you? And they usually say, oh, I just want them to be able to, tell me I want an apple or I want a cookie. And so then like, I usually ask, when would that be helpful? And a lot of the times the parents will say, all day, that would be helpful. If they would just tell me all day. I'm like, okay, well, then I just like start asking more specific questions like, oh, at dinner time, are they trying to tell you that? Or, during snack time. So then that usually will narrow it down. Sometimes I have to give them choices. A lot of the times our families, I feel like, can be really overwhelmed when you're like, what goals do you want to write? They're like, I don't know. What do you think? Is what I get a lot. So sometimes like I'll give them a bunch of choices too within the goal just to kind of help guide them or help them kind of see what it is that we would maybe be wanting to focus on, like in terms of routine. Because they very easily forget that kind of we want to walk through routines. And I always have families like, oh, well, what time should we set up for every week? And I'm like, no, so kind of just always having to remind them too, like our model is based around those different routines. So, what part of your day would it be helpful for them to be able to communicate with signs or whatever? And then I guess same thing with like finding that timeline. A lot of times the families will say as soon as possible. So, again, then I might say like, oh, is there somewhere you're going or maybe something that you have coming up as a family that you'd want them to be able to do that by? And if they say no, then I always go back, well, we can just say like, oh, in 3 months or anywhere in the range from 3 to 6, and then they'll just pick a timeline. Because sometimes parents don't have like a set, like we're going on vacation or by their 3rd birthday. And so it's also okay to just put the parent really wants it done within 4 months or something. So I kind of just, and some families are way easier to go through the process with. I feel like sometimes it's definitely like pulling teeth, and they definitely need a lot more structure and choice to kind of support them through that, because they obviously look at us as the experts. But I always try to put it back on them and tell them, like you're around them all the time and are with them way more than me. Just kind of thinking about those different routines. How would this activity or skill be most meaningful and impactful for you? I always spend the most time, I feel like, writing outcomes out of the whole process. So I always tell them like, we can spend as much time, we can have 1 outcome, we can have 7. It's okay if you want to break everything down to, a lot of the times they'll tell me in the first question all the things they want. So I kind of just will type them out really quick so that I can then go back. Because again, sometimes they don't realize like, oh, that they're kind of separate goals. So to split things into, but in terms of like measurable stuff, like there's even times which I don't even know if I should be doing this. I think this is something Scott way back when taught us. Like I still use the same like template he had taught me years ago. But like there's sometimes if like the skill is just not super measurable, that I'll just say that the child will do this for the majority of his day, or he'll do it for half of the opportunities or something. Because that's what mom wants. She's like, I just want him to do it most of the time. I'm like, okay, well, we'll write it that way then. Even though to me, as the therapists are like, oh, that's pretty broad, but it's what they're telling me they want. So that's what it will be. So
Yeah.
I don't know if
Um,
that's even probably very accurate of a measurableness, but every now
Yeah.
and then I have to throw that in because that's what they just keep telling me.
Yeah.
So like with honors example, if a family is wanting their child to talk and they're not even close, could you write that goal and then just make it a longer time frame?
yes. you
Or I
can.
mean, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Mhm.
Yeah, and then you'd
Okay.
basically, I feel like, be in charge at all of the visits. You just would be working on all of the skills
Yeah.
that would be preceded by talking.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Yeah.
you know, the nice part is you've got a start date, right, and a target date for the goal, and you can write a goal for one day. You can write a goal for a month. You can write a goal for 3 years. You'll see some of our veteran staff writing goals for 6-month periods because that's the way we did it as an agency for about 25 years. And it's been very difficult for the people who learned it that way to unlearn it. But you do not have to write goals for a 6-month period. You can write them for what makes sense to the outcome. And sometimes we have preemies that are born and the parents say, you know, I just want them to meet their developmental milestones as they're getting older. Honestly, the end date is their 3rd birthday and their start date is when they're an infant starting services. And then every 6 months, we update it, we document progress. But you can write a goal for a 3-year period if that's meaningful to the family. Now, fast forward 2 years, that may or may not be meaningful. You might end the goal and not have it anymore. But yeah, that's one thing I really like to stress is you don't have to write a goal for a 6-month period or a year period. It can be whatever makes sense for that goal. And then within the body of the goal, you know, how there's the goal, right? The main goal. And then I'm going to pull up Jesse, do you have a child on your caseload I can look up and just show an example of a goal form?
Diaz. Joel, you mean, are you looking up the IFSP?
Yeah, I was just going to pull up, you know, that goal actually page on the IFSP, I think is super confusing the way that it's written. You guys might feel different. You might think it's very black and white. I do not. So when you guys get here, like, right, so this is your goal, you know, your timeline, it's your learner, which in this case is Joel. You know, the skill is that's his participation, right? He's making choices and he's feeding himself. And the activity setting is mealtime and snack time. So again, 4 pieces, right, of the goal. And then down here is where sometimes you can write those little tiny baby steps, right? So again, if a parent wants a child to walk or talk and you know it's not going to happen for a while, down here you might write, you know, in 6 months, we want Joel to be using gestures. You know, we want Joel to be pointing. You know, you can get a little bit more specific down here. And that can be more of your wording than the family's. So this is where I feel like as a therapist, you can insert some of those smaller steps that you know are going to happen because that's how you're going to be documenting progress. Usually people will also write, you know, if you just go through these 3 questions right here and answer those within this box, you'll be documenting that. So again, what actions, you know, and sorry, Honor, we're all SLPs except you. So we're using all examples of language development. I feel like we're totally dissing motor development today. But, you know, you could do this too, you know, we'll know that Joel's meeting progress, you know, when he's sitting up and when he's reaching for objects on his own and when he's, you know, pulling to stand, right? So these are where you can insert some of those little tiny baby steps that we know are important as therapists. And again, an opportunity, like Taylor said earlier, to kind of go through that. Hey, this is what we're going to work towards as we work towards your big goal. These are all the little baby steps in between now and then. And then when you come back in 6 months, obviously in this box number 7, that's where you document what the child is doing 6 months down the road at that review. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Erin, what's your, and I feel like Erin, you know, has had a chance to work in 2 different infant toddler programs as well, knowing that we all do it a little bit different, but kind of what's been your experience writing goals, Erin, and kind of trying to get families to really focus on not the skill, but the participation within an activity?
What I usually say to parents is something along the lines of, like, you mentioned this is a really hard part of your day, or communication is something that you want to focus on. Thinking about your whole day, what's one piece of it that would be easier if he could communicate better? And then once they've named that, I say, you know, what types of things would you want to see your child doing at that time of day that would make your routine easier? So that's sort of the script I follow. And sometimes that goes really well. Other times I think we need to go into more detail, or families need a little bit more support. So it really depends on the family, but that's usually where I start.
I love that, Erin. I think you just summed up early intervention. Sometimes it goes really well and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, sometimes RBIs are beautiful and the families talk, like exactly like Michelle said, the family's talking more than we are, and you know, sometimes they're not. And that's just the way it is. So yeah, I think, you know, and I think learning those little tiny tricks is something that you learn along the way. But I do think writing functional, family-centered goals are difficult, because it is way easier just to write them objectively with your criteria, your measurement, your goal. You know, I mean, that's right. Children are probably going to make progress faster if we're writing the goals, because we know what goals, you know, we know what to write next for that. So it's definitely different. But again, the buy-in is all about the family. And, you know, again, we say research tells us, you know, even personal goals, right? If you write it down, you're a lot more likely to work towards and achieve it than if you just think it in your head. So part of this too is really just helping the families get their thoughts down on paper, because we know that ultimately that's probably going to really help meet that goal too. I'm going to throw out, right, we're all used to writing child-centered goals. Joel will do this, blah, blah, blah. What about family-centered goals, where it's the parent that wants to learn something, or the parent that wants to do something? What is your thoughts, feelings, experiences writing those family-centered outcomes?
I like to write those if parents express to me that they are feeling stuck on something. A lot of times discipline, I just don't know how to get them to listen when I say no. Those types of statements that parents might make, where I don't feel confident that I'm ever going to be able to help their child listen when they say no either, because that's like a toddler thing. And in those types of spaces, I like to maybe bring up a parent goal of, like, parents will feel confident in strategies to use to support their child during a tantrum. Or if mom's saying that she's feeling really lonely and isolated, I've written a goal about, like, identifying mom groups or community supports before. And those are the 2 things that I've sort of done family goals for in the past.
Okay, so I've never,
ahead,
sorry,
Jessie.
I've never written like family-centered goals. So give me a few more examples. So Erin, those were 2 good examples. Like, what type of goals come up?
So I guess in my experience, or some that I've written in the past, especially when I was in Wyandotte County, I had a lot of moms who like wanted to learn in a second language, who wanted to go back to school, who wanted to get a job. So a lot of the times when we're done kind of with the child goals, I'll usually ask, like, are there any other goals that you guys would like to write as a family? It doesn't have to be about the child, because we are, the IFSP in that is the word family. So by benefiting the entire family, we're in turn benefiting your child. So sometimes parents will be like, oh, I didn't know that this could be about me. So I've written goals about like helping moms get a job, helping moms find more resources in the community, kind of like Erin mentioned, learning a second language. I'm trying to think of other stuff. I mean, a lot of the times they will have great ideas of ways they want to either better educate themselves. I've had parents who just like they were first time parents and they just had no idea and they just wanted to learn more about like development and like what they could know and learn. So we wrote a goal about that. Again, they're usually very broad in terms of like building confidence, being able to, you know, talk about development with me while I'm there. But I do feel like the parents usually feel very empowered and they feel appreciated that they're kind of a part of it because it's, again, usually always related back to the kiddo. I think I have one now where like the mom is wanting to learn English. So she's been doing a great job. Like we're almost to the point where we wouldn't need Carolina. She's doing so good, but and again, at the beginning, she wanted to really rely on me, but again, trying to push her outside of her box and trying to sign herself up for things. And she didn't. She's enrolled in her little English classes and she goes every week. And so I feel like they're definitely probably underutilized because we just aren't really usually educated on the family side of things. I feel like I've even had one on some siblings before, like siblings that are older. Just to help find them like resources or supporting them somehow. So I feel like it's kind of endless the options that there could be out there. Just always make sure you mark family outcome at the bottom so you know it's related to the family and not the kid. But
Okay,
yeah.
say
Like,
that
they can be-
again. So on your outcomes.
like at the bottom, you know, there's like four little it's like personal relationship. Like what's it
Oh,
related
yeah.
to?
Okay.
If you're writing it about somebody other than the kiddo, you need to probably also click family outcome
Okay.
for sure.
Got it.
Yeah, we had, I think that those family outcomes are something that a lot of people struggle with. We had one parent who wanted to get her GED and the family service coordinator was very apprehensive about putting that goal down on the IFSP because she was like, how am I going to help her get her GED? And that's not my responsibility. Well, because again, it's definitely not your responsibility to walk the parent through, right, and do the classes with her. But like Taylor said, sometimes that encouragement, getting the resources to help mom even know where to start looking, like that's that family service coordination piece that's such a big part of early intervention. So they can definitely be very parent family centered, or it can be something like, you know, grandma wants to learn some new strategies to help Max be able to sleep through the night when he spends a night at her house. So it can also be family goals centered around development, but it can also be family goals centered around something the parent wants to do for him or herself. And again, that doesn't mean you have to help the family buy a new car or anything like that, but what resources are available in the community to connect that parent to accomplish or at least work towards that goal.
And I will say too, I feel like when you do start writing them, you'll notice too, like how empowered those parents feel. Like I noticed like this mom of mine that's now learning English, like you can just tell like her confidence is so much higher. And even like the way she's interacting with her kids, like she just feels like she's more part of this community because she was feeling very isolated after moving over here from Columbia. So I feel like too, you could just kind of see a change in the whole dynamic overall, which I mean, always helps benefit the child when you're helping relieve any stress, anxiety, all of those things that our kids feed off of. So yeah, I mean, like Monica said, it can be a little bit interesting when you first start writing them, but they do really support and benefit everyone.
Okay, what else is on your mind about outcomes? I'm looking in the FTP. I believe in the FTP and probably in your binder, there should be a section on outcomes. And there's probably, sorry, I'm going through, share my screen. There are a couple, again, if you're dying to read some more, there are a couple articles on IFSP outcome statements made simple. So again, going through and giving you guys some reference to work through, regardless of if you look at Robin McWilliams or Carl Dunst or Dathan and Melissa, whatever researcher that you're looking at regarding early intervention, they're all going to be writing outcomes the same in terms of that child, family focus, participation, getting away from that skill. One of the bigger differences is Robin McWilliams likes to have lots and lots and lots of goals on an IFSP that he has written. So probably like 15. Dathan and Melissa, Rush and Sheldon don't have that kind of number that Robin likes to have. So really, and it's, I think exactly like Taylor said, I mean, I think you're going to have families that have 1 or 2 outcomes, and some families are going to have 7, and there's no right or wrong. As long as there's a goal on the IFSP, that's certainly the most important. I was just talking with Jocelyn a couple nights ago, and she has a family who is not wanting to continue with therapy services anymore and just wants to go to family service coordination check-ins. Child's an auto qualifier, developmentally doing pretty okay, and mom just is having trouble meeting for the visits. And so Jocelyn had called and said, can I do that? And honestly, family service coordination is the only service that's required to be on an IFSP, and that's required by IDEA. They don't even have to have therapy, a therapist. They have to have a family service coordinator. So absolutely, you might have a goal that you might have one goal related to family service coordination, helping, facilitate that transition process when the child is old enough to be referred to the school district. So again, I think that sometimes as therapists, we think the goals have to be therapy and discipline and development related, but we don't in our particular world. So this little article is a nice article, and then there's another one also that's a little brief case again, which is a Rush and Sheldon type of article, but I can send these to you guys too after we're done, just as reference, but they should be in your binders. Thoughts or questions on IFSP outcome writing? I think the best way to do it is if you guys are really, really good listeners. And I think that's sometimes why it's so nice is if you do the eval, if you take the child on your caseload, right, you've been there for that RBI and you've heard a lot of the things the parent has shared. But I think oftentimes during the RBI, parents are giving you guys little nuggets of, the behavior, right before nap time is atrocious, or like they're telling you those things that might be important. And I've heard Leslie, she does her famous little starter statements that if I heard you right, I heard blah blah blah, I heard you say that getting jacked down for naps is really difficult. Would you like to create a goal centered around that? So sometimes if you take those statements that families are already offering within the RBI, you've already got the goals. It's just a matter of helping the families tease them out and really giving that family the option. Is this something that's important enough to put down on paper? But definitely, ironically, this was a big reoccurring theme I saw during the employee evaluations, goal settings that we've been doing so far. This and family service coordination being organized in general, but I think people are really wanting to know, okay, how can I write these different than what I'm doing now? What's a different way to do it? So I think this will be a part of what we just decide as an agency to dig a little bit deeper into this year, and really give you guys some more tools and conversations to have some other ideas on how to steer those when you're in the homes with the
I will say also that little section in the IFSP where it has like resources, priorities, and all of that, you know what I'm talking about? That priorities one, I always go over before like I write the outcomes. So like a lot of the times I think the evaluator will sometimes carry those over from that bottom part of the My Child story and put them in there. But I always like to review that and say like, oh, these are the priorities and kinds of times of day that the evaluation team and you had discussed. Is there anything else that's missing or you'd like to add to your priorities list? And then when we go to write outcomes, if they like didn't write one on staying in bed or bath time, I'll always say, oh, when we were doing priorities, I heard you tell me that sleep time's really difficult. Did you want to write something on that? Or do you feel like that's something you can manage on your own? And then they'll be like, oh yeah, totally forgot about bedtime. Yes, let's write a goal for that. So sometimes it's helpful to kind of address their priorities because like Monica said, it kind of just goes right into them, all the outcomes that you'd want to write with them.
So I have a question. It might be kind of a loaded question, but so just in working with families at Britain Development who were also getting ITS, and then like I'm just thinking of a visit I was shadowing. There are some families that I think are maxed out and they don't want to do anything. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, they're doing a lot, but they, I mean, at this one visit, I was with Mary Ellen, like the mom basically said, like, I want somebody to come put my hands on this kid and like do it because I might not get a chance this week or whatever. And I could tell the families like that I was working with at Britain Development who are getting ITS, they brought their kid to Britain Development so that somebody else would do it, right? So how do you approach those families when you're, and can you guys tell like that's kind of where the family's at when you're writing outcomes, or I don't know. How do you guide that?
Man, that is a loaded
I know it's
question.
kind of a loaded question. I know.
Yeah. So I'm gonna put this to your peers
Okay.
and let them talk through their experiences. And then from an admin standpoint, I can, and from, my experience too, but I definitely like to hear from Taylor and Aaron on this one.
So are you talking more about like they're wanting like direct therapy versus our model?
They kind of want direct therapy.
Okay.
They kind of want people just to tell them
what
needs to happen next. I don't think a lot of families, it's not that they don't want to think about it. I think they're just not in a space. That
so
they can.
I will say in all of my years doing early intervention, I always have a large chunk of families that don't get the model or don't want to get it or just don't feel like it's for them, but they still want our services. I mean, at the end of the day, like I'm still going to go to their house and I will do kind of what they're basically asking. Like I still will try to ask those questions to them and put it on them and like, oh, would you like to practice? Nope. Okay, you don't have to practice. I'm still going to show you and model for you what I would do with them. So I guess in a way, maybe it's more direct therapy that I'm doing. But I still try to throw in like, would you like to try? Or is there a way that, you want to look at it differently? But I mean, I'm not going to like kick them out because they don't want to do the coaching model. I feel like after the first visit or so, I definitely can tell which of my families are going to be really good with the coaching model. I have families that are kind of in between. I have families that like literally want to just go do the dishes and not even be in the room when I'm there. And a lot of the times in that situation, I'll even like tell the kids like, oh, should we go see what mom's doing? Maybe she needs help. Like, you don't want us to be there, but I'm going to at least make you listen to what we're going to talk about. Like in Wyandotte County, I had a lot of couch parents where they just wanted to sit on the couch on their phones and they didn't want to ever get down on the floor. So again, I would tell the kids like, oh, go show mommy the book you're reading, or let's go show mommy the baby. So I would just move the visit to that parent. And I feel like that's still the same in Johnson County. Like I have such a mix and such a wide range of, I guess, learners or where that parent is in that stage of their life. So,
and do you end up kind of just writing the outcomes? I mean, during the IFSP, do you feel like you're kind of just leading that?
I mean, I would say most of the time the parents will at least give me something that they want to work on. It might just be the one goal, even if I feel like, oh man, this kid probably needs 3 goals. I still just will write the one. A lot of the other times, like I will have to give them like, okay, we could write something like this. Does that sound like something you'd be interested in? And they will usually at least give me an answer. I will say too, though, even if you only write one outcome or can only get one outcome, if like a couple months goes by and you notice other things or you hear the parents say like, oh man, I wish they could follow directions a little better, you can always say, oh, hey, we can have a review and add that as a goal if that's something you really want to work on. So sometimes it takes just getting to know them and like building a little bit more rapport as you're coming into their house, and you'll hear little things that they really do want to work on that they just were overwhelmed or, like you said, kind of just like done with therapy things. So sometimes I'll take that, or I'll use like the 6-month review as a time to be like, oh, you know, like he's doing so well in all of these things, and I'm noticing that you've really been working on him with potty training. Did you want to write that as a goal? So you can kind of lead them in. But I mean, at the IFSP meeting, I feel like it would be really hard if you didn't know them to kind of get the vibe of what kind of learner they are, or if they are going to be a couch parent or really involved or think of you as a babysitter when you come. I feel like we get the whole gamut. So it's kind of like, let's do our best at the IFSP meeting and then we can always adjust. I always feel like that's the good thing about IFSPs is we can always adjust in 2 weeks, even if we have to. So that's the beauty of a few signatures.
Okay.
I personally love the coaching model. I agree with Taylor that I usually have like sort of the 2 categories of family, and I can tell really fast who would respond well to coaching, who doesn't love it as much. I honestly do the same exact thing as Taylor. If I am doing something with a child and mom or dad wants to sort of be out of the way, I subtly invite the parent to participate in different ways. Like if a child is going back and forth with me, then I might say like mama's turn, and the child goes over and takes the toy to the parent. I will narrate what I'm doing or talk about what I'm doing and why while I'm doing it, with the sometimes false hope that that will be absorbed. And honestly, I like what Taylor said about, you know, you'll get little nuggets from the parent of, oh my gosh, this thing is really hard. I think sometimes parents don't always know how much power they have in what we work on in our services. And sometimes if I'm not getting any buy-in after a couple of months, I might check back in and make sure that we are working on the thing that is their priority. Because if we aren't, then there's no chance that I'll get buy-in. But maybe if we can have a conversation of, is there something that would be more helpful for you right now? And then at the end of the day, I try to give really small, doable nuggets that add almost no work if I can. Simple things that add 0 stress to their day when we're reflecting on what we want to focus on between a visit. And I ever say, work on this. I always say, is there anything that stood out to you at our visit today that you want to try this week? So at the end of the day, the joint plan is, and the onus is always on the family to identify what they want to work on. And oftentimes they say something that is not something that we talked about at all in our visit. And that makes me feel like it is their priority. So I like that when they tell me, you know, some random thing that I wasn't expecting is what they want to work on, because that gives me more information. So
Yeah.
Yeah, and from my, from an admin standpoint, I think coaching should look different in every home because it's supposed to be individualized for the family. And you have some families that you're going to be able to coach on the fly and do that reflection. And you're going to have families where you need to do a lot more exactly what Erin said, direct therapy, so to speak. And narrate and do that self-talk and that parallel talk to teach the family kind of what you're doing. So, and we know, right? So we have 2,300 families that had services in our program last year. A small percentage of those families do private therapy. Not all of them do. So I do believe in my heart, this is the best way to work with families that have young children. But we live in a very educated community that has a lot of additional resources, and sometimes people think more is better, and I just am grateful. This is how I look at it. I'm grateful that we live in a community that has more to offer for the families that want to access it versus our families who live in rural Kansas who have nothing for hundreds of miles. So again, you can definitely get your feathers ruffled about it, or you can just be thankful that we live where we live, because we do have a lot. And just like school districts are like, not every parent's happy with their services in a school. Not every family is going to be happy with us. And the flip side of that too, we've had a lot of situations where families have left children's and left other places because they've been unhappy with the private model and something happened there. And again, it's not our job to, talk them into how great we are, but if this is where they choose to focus their efforts, then perfect. We try also, I think, as much as we can, and as long as the families are okay with that, to have a relationship with the private therapist. I think a lot of it is simple education. I do think a lot of people in the community that haven't worked here do think we just sit on the couch and talk. I think that's probably unfortunately, when we switched to this model 10 years ago, that was kind of, how we knew how to coach, right? We thought we were just supposed to ask questions and not do hands-on. So we've come a long way in understanding our role. And again, I think it's our job to work with our private partners as much as we can to help, again, tie those things and make sure the family's getting what they need in both places. So it's not perfect, but when you're fitting an educational model, a special ed model with a medical model, you're never going to get a perfect marriage of services, if that makes sense.
Jesse, I think too, because I feel like some of your question was about like the IFSP meeting and already feeling that from the parents. I feel like you could always say too, like, it seems like you guys have a lot going on and things could be overwhelming. Like you could always write like a more broad goal just so that they have something. And then like, again, once we kind of get working on things or we get to know each other a little better, other things might come up so we can write some either more specific goals or come up with goals that maybe you're noticing as time goes. Because I feel like too, you're just, like if the parent's overwhelmed already at the IFSP meeting and they're just like, you decide, you could always just say like, no, this can all be really overwhelming. Like I'm a mom, it's a lot. So together, maybe we could come up with one, more broad goal. And then as we get to know each other and I get to know your kiddo, we can come up with a more detailed plan. I feel like that's just what's really great about early intervention is just so much gray and flexibility, and it's okay if it's not perfect right at the beginning. We can adjust and change things up. So I feel like if you get to a house and you're just like, wow, this parent doesn't want to give me anything, like it's probably okay to be like, let me help you come up with something just based off of what I read from the RBI, and then you and dad or you and grandma can sit and talk, and if you guys come up with stuff, just let me know. We can always add it.
Okay. Okay.
Because I've definitely done that too. Like the parents like, I don't know, I need to talk to dad, or I want to talk to grandparents. And I'm like, that's fine. Like we can finish the IFSP today. I can leave it open. I don't have to, like lock it right away, or I can, and then I can open it again if you want to add stuff. It's totally fine. Because sometimes like they might not be totally prepped for that IFSP meeting. In terms of like, they didn't realize they had to come up with goals, so they can feel like they're on the spot a little bit. So I think just letting them know that it's not end all be all at that meeting. And it's okay if we do just write one really generic goal.
So like the 45-day, that's the date of the meeting. So you don't have to lock, like,
Wow.
there's nobody looking to see, yeah, but it was locked like 3 weeks later.
You have to have it, the sign, the documents need to be signed by that 45
Okay,
day
with that day,
timeline.
okay.
But you
Okay.
can't physically lock it. Monica's only going to bug you about it if she has a database thing coming up, and then she
Okay.
will send you an email saying, Jesse, you didn't lock these 3 IFSPs. Are they done? And then you'll go back and lock it for the date it was signed on.
Correct.
See, that's what I need to know. Like, where are all the eyes? I don't know where all the eyes are yet watching.
You just don't want to sign an
What do I
IFSP
have
like,
to do?
what is it,
And what
June?
do I
The
not?
end of June is the end of
Okay.
June usually one. It's like, don't sign a new IFSP at like June 15th if the database has to be checked June 30th, because you got to get it done then.
Yes.
Okay,
There,
see,
there are
those are all
definitely,
things I'll learn.
yes, there are check and balances every quarter. We do a database cleanup. So yeah, so you guys, you and Honor just haven't been around enough to experience that. But come April, we'll be making sure any meetings that were in January, February, March are polished up and marked complete and things like that. So
Oh, good. You'll have
yeah,
a lot of
so-
polishing, I'm sure, from mine.
you'll be fine. It's definitely kind of like again, that check and balance to so where are the eyes? The eyes are every 3 to 4 months.
Yes.
My eyes have other things to do besides micromanage your database.
Don't worry, Jesse, I've helped her go through the sheet. And so it's just, there's lots of people that don't always dot their I's and check their T's.
Okay.
So you aren't the only one.
No.
And sometimes it's honestly easy to forget. Like if you all of a sudden, like, I feel like I've had like 18 transition plans, transition conference, and 6-month reviews in the last 3 weeks. And I'm like, crap, I don't know if I finished that. I don't know if I locked it. Well, Monica will let me know in a short time.
I will.
I did
That is
not.
true.
It happens. Things get busy.
They do get busy. So yeah, so don't worry about any of that stuff. We get to that together. And once you get into, once your caseload and honors, once you guys are up and rolling, it does, I think, get a little bit easier to manage when you have more experience managing it. Like right now, when you only have 1 or 2 things, it's hard to really see that cog of the wheel turning, but you guys will get there. You've got good mentors who do a nice job of, well, not Carrie, we won't let her watch this. She's really got a pretty big list, but it's all right. That's a small part of the job. None of us became, early interventionists because we love marking databases complete. So that's not a thing. Okay, so let's spend the next however long we have, obviously until 2:30. If we finish earlier, great. If not, we can talk until 2:30, but let's talk about frequency of services. I feel like this is a pretty big, again, when you're coming from a school district, you're coming from a medical model, this is a lot of gray because you're used to twice a week for 30 minutes. You're used to once a week, like, and in this particular phase of life for a child, this is the only time that we have services written in a pretty gray area. And so again, over the last 10 to 12 years, I feel like we're understanding the primary service provider model better. When we first were introduced to it years ago, one of the things that I think we heard and we held on to was the idea of front loading, right? So going more in the beginning and then phasing out so the family was doing more and we were, going less, which is still the goal, right? We still want to operate under the assumption that we want to provide a family with more support and back off as the family gets more comfortable. However, that front loading time, I think, can look and should look different for every family. So I think some families are going to front load, and you might go, let's say, weekly for 3 to 6 months, right? And then maybe you start backing off. And I think some families, you probably are going to front load for 2 to 3 months and be able to start backing off. So that front loading and backing off shouldn't look the same for every single family. If it does, it's not individualized and it's not following special education law. So when I pull up IFSPs and I look at, for example, Taylor's caseload, and I see every single kid on her caseload has 14 visits in a 6-month period, that is not individualized. That is Taylor's favorite way of doing it. That is not individualized to what the family and the child needs. So I like to see some families having 20 visits in a 30-month period, or 6 months in a 6-month period. Like, I like to see that variation. And I think that one of the things I've really tried to push the team away from is at the initial IFSP, when it's time to talk about services, as new to infant toddler, please do not ask a family, how much support do you need? They do not know what you're asking. They do not know what the visits look like, and they can't answer that question. 6 months down the road, when they've been doing early intervention for 6 months, I think that's a fair question to ask them, because they know what they're getting into. But when you ask a family, how much support do you need? What you're really asking is, how much special education services do you need over the next 6 months? They don't know. I like the conversation better for you guys to do a more of, based on developmentally where Joel is, based on the outcomes of X, Y, and Z. My recommendation would be to start with, services at least 3 times a month for the first 6 months. And then we can talk about switching later on. How does that feel? How does that sound to you? I do want you guys making professional recommendations based on your professional knowledge, based on the development, based on the IFSP outcomes, and then based on working that out. A family might be like, yeah, or a family be like, that's too much, or that's not enough. I mean, again, I think that can still be a conversation, but I think it's really unfair to ask a family how many times they would like us to come out over the first 6 months when they don't even know what we're going to be doing. So that is my spiel. I will tell you, there are people that work at infant toddler that feel very differently about that. But this is one of the times where I say, I'm the boss. And I like that first conversation at initial IFSP to be more therapist directed, talking about frequency. I think it's really unfair. And in the same way, a doctor would never ask you how much chemotherapy you need to start cancer therapy, we shouldn't be asking a family how much special education support they need. We should be making a recommendation and then coming up with a middle ground. Now, Taylor and Aaron have been doing this. I don't know how you guys feel about that. That is my goal and my wish and my dream. I don't know how that feels to you guys, though.
Well, I will say, coming from a different infant toddler services where they wanted us to ask the parents how many visits, or not really how many visits, but how often do you want us to come? How many? Most of the families look at you like a deer in headlights and say, I don't know, you're the professional, you tell me. So it's pointless to ask the question, because even if you do say like, oh, I really feel like, based on everything I've read and what I know, that coming 2 to 3 times a month is probably kind of the best fit right now. And sometimes they will tell you, like, with my schedule and with everything going on, we can't make that work. We could maybe do every other week. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's try that. So a lot of the times they'll come right back with, if they do have a really busy schedule, or like both parents work but they both want to be involved. So I agree that they don't know. they just feel bad then not giving you an answer. So yeah, I definitely feel like just kind of telling them what you feel like is the best fit to start with. And then, like Monica said, at 6 months, reevaluating as needed.
I really like that too, because I feel like I've kind of made that mistake so far where I've asked that question and it gets the bad habit of parents kind of expecting you to come every single week. And then, especially like the more anxious parents want you to come like 2 times a week or every week. And so, just getting in that habit of kind of giving that recommendation and then eventually kind of weaning off services where you're not coming every single week, especially if they don't need services every single week.
Yeah, I used to just ask parents because that's how I was taught in grad school. And I ran into the same situation that Anna ran into, which is parents that didn't really actually need weekly were getting weekly services from me. And I didn't have time for visits for people who did need more often. And so now I usually say something like, frequency is a conversation that we have together, but usually we start with more visits and then we fade out as you guys feel more confident. And then I give a recommendation and I say, I think that it would be a great place to start doing every other week. How does that feel to you? And that's gone better for me than the other way.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I had a family tell me they wanted visits every day in Wyandotte County. When I asked them, like, can you come every day? I'm like, no, I cannot come every day. I can barely come every week. I mean, I didn't tell them that, but it, like, putting it on them, it just is a lot, especially when they're new to infant toddler. Like, I've definitely had families that, like, I've already seen a kid in the family or they had infant toddler, so they might know a little more as well. But like 98% of the time, the families would prefer, I feel like, our professional input.
Mm-hmm. It's like asking your toddler, what do you want for dinner? And they say ice cream and you say no. Well, then why do we even ask? So, and we've had this situation happen where, especially as children enter our program later. So, after, they're 24 months old and they're 28, 29 months old, we only have that family for 6 or 7 months, right? So I will be honest, like, you probably should be seeing that child at least 3 times a month while they're in our program, if not more. And when Dathan and Melissa came back to talk to us, a couple of years ago, maybe right before the pandemic, probably December of 19, and did kind of a refresher course, this was one of the pieces they really delved into deeper, because honestly, what happened across the nation was 10, 15 years ago, as more and more states were moving to the PSP model, what they found was frequency of services went drastically down. And it was because people were interpreting it as, we go in for a month or 2 and then we back out. And that was it. And so Dathan and Melissa, I think, have done a lot of repairing to make sure that people understand that really it should take 3 to 6 months of services first starting before a family can actively contribute to this conversation. So when it's time to do the 6-month review, you can literally say, hey, we've been doing visits, 2 times a month for the last 6 months. How does that feel when you think about the next 6 months? Hey, we've been doing visits, every, 3 times a month. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? And then they can be a much more active participant in that conversation. But they do recommend that front loading period be 3 to 6 months. Whereas 10, 15 years ago, I will be honest, it was 4 to 6 weeks. That's how long we would front load, because we didn't understand exactly what that meant. So again, we know more now than we did 10 years ago, but I also do think that's why some families, we lost families over the decade, especially the first 5 years of this. We had trouble with medical providers not understanding why we weren't doing therapy more often. And it was because we didn't really truly understand the flexibility of this model. And when you look at other programs, other home visiting programs, right? Whether it's early Head Start or whether it's parents as teachers, a lot of those programs, they're going in, at least 2 to 3 times a month as well. So if parents as teachers is having visits twice a month, why are we only going in once a month when the child has developmental delays? So again, I think that's where that making that recommendation as a professional really is an important piece of our model at the beginning of services. And it also, I think, gives you a lot of clout later on if you need to add or want to add in a joint provider, right? The family's probably going to trust you because you made a recommendation from the very beginning. They think you know what you're talking about. You know, if someone asks me if I want something and I invited them into my house to help me, you know, I'm just like, well, do they even know what they're doing? Why are they asking me how much I need? So, and like Erin and Taylor shared too, you do get families that say, well, I'd like you to come every day. Well, then you have to tell them, well, that's not our model. Well, we just asked you, you know, like, so again, you're stuck, right? So again, I think when that conversation goes differently from the start on the back end, when you want to decrease visits, when you want to add a provider, I think that conversation goes differently on the back end too. But yeah, it's tricky. But I think there's a way to do it that allows you guys some grace, truthfully. And one of the really cool things, I think, Dathan and Melissa have created an Excel sheet actually to look at dosage and frequency. And based on different factors, whether or not how old the child is, if there's a diagnosis, a lot of different things, this dosage calculator will tell you how many times a month it would recommend based on all of these factors. And I will send that to you guys. My computer's freezing right now, but it's pretty easy to use, truthfully. And I think that also helps you get an idea of, okay, based on all of these factors, what would the data tell us this needs? And most of the time it does recommend, you know, 3 to 4 times a month, which is, you know, again, almost once a week. So you're 18 to 20 visits when you go to write your frequency on your IFSPs. How does this support and differ from what you guys feel like you've been, you know, learning and absorbing as you've been, you know, going along and starting?
I feel like this has really cleared up a lot, and especially how goals can be more family centered. I'd seen some goals that were family centered, but I didn't know like the extent of how, like the type of goals you could do, especially like the example with the GED was really helpful. And then the frequency of services was really helpful too.
I'm just happy I don't have to document every single FSC minute like I did in Wyandotte County. So celebrate. Good times. Come on.
See, sometimes you don't realize how good you have it till you go somewhere else, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that was rough. I feel like coming here and changing the way services are, it's like been a huge relief because it's impossible to document every tiny little FSC minute. So thank you, Monica.
Absolutely. Questions, thoughts? That is glossing the service or surface, right, for frequency. But you know, keep in mind, some kids you're gonna have, you know, you as FSC, you as PSP, and you're gonna have joint providers on right away, because you know up front that the family, you know, and you are likely going to need and want joint support. Sometimes that support's added down the road. But again, that's the nice part of the flexibility, is that you can do that at any point in time. I will definitely follow up with you with an email today. I'll send you guys the 2 articles for outcomes. I'm going to send you the dosage estimator. I think that might be nice for you guys, honestly, just to take the kids that are on your caseload now, or sit down with your mentor and you know, just kind of look through their caseload and play around with it a little bit. But it's really, of course, my computer never ever freezes. But that I think will be a nice way for you, again, just to continue to expand your knowledge on what that frequency looks like. But know that there is no cookie cutter, and ultimately, whatever you guys, if one of you, I had people that call me all the time and say, do we see kids more than once a week? Well, yeah. Because if I say no, again, that's not individualized, and that's, in my mind, a huge due process issue. And we do have families that have visits twice a week, especially if our children are multiply delayed, and they might have a primary as PT, but they've got nutrition, and they've got vision, and they've got speech, and they've got maybe KSD for hearing. So that primary provider's going out maybe once by themselves, and that second visit a week is another discipline. And the following week, they're going out with a different discipline, and maybe they're going to daycare instead of at, mom and dad's house. So sometimes it can be that the joint provider changes. Sometimes it's that the location of the visit changes, but the answer is yes. I mean, if Erin calls me and says she feels like this family needs twice a week, well, why would I argue with her? I have no idea what this development looks like. I have no idea what the child's dynamics and family situation looks like. I'm going to say to her, fantastic, what do you need for me to do this? So again, don't feel like you have to provide services within, an exact frequency, because there's lots of flexibility here.
Monica, when I put this meeting and then today's meeting on the timesheet, would that be facilitator meeting FM, or would that be?
What is today called? You could just do PSP if you wanted.
Okay,
Like
and then
PSP
for
board,
RBI too.
just RBI, yeah.
Okay.
That'd be good enough. Other thoughts, questions that you guys might have? We did do a couple years ago, maybe last year, a lunch and learn on FAB scheduling, which is the flexible activity based. Again, the idea are not supposed to go same time, same week, same day. And that's on YouTube. So I'll send you guys that link that you can watch. And I've got a PowerPoint that went along with it, because it was a lunch and learn that we did for all staff. Talked a lot more in depth about services and frequency of services. So I'm happy to send that to you guys if you'd like me to. Okay. Any questions? All right. Go forth and do magic.
Thanks, Monica.
Bye.